In 1986, Theodore Geisel walked into the San Diego Museum of Art. At 82 years old, the moment marked one of the rare times the author granted someone permission to his mischievous cast of characters, allowing them to be used in an exhibition called Dr. Seuss From Then to Now.
I want to see the cat first. I mean, I like it.
Geisel walked through the 8,000 square foot space and surveyed his entire career. In his lifetime, Theodore Geisel, aka Dr. Seuss, authored and co-authored over 66 books, won the Pulitzer Prize, and helped introduce countless children to the fun of reading. He was also infamous for being extremely protective of his work. But after he passed away, Geisel's second wife, Audrey, recognized that to keep his legacy alive, she needed to start licensing out the rights. And one of the first places to call was Broadway. This is the story of a small little show that got blown out of proportion, of a new technology that flipped Broadway on its head, a story of fraud, greed, and one very mischievous cat. This is the story of Seussical. No feeling is worse, no pain more annoying than losing your money without even knowing. You sit on your phone about to have a conniption because you can't find it, that hidden subscription. Well, now you can make your day much more sunny thanks to our sponsor, the app Rocket Money. Just a couple of taps and boom, like a rocket, the charges all go, meaning money in pocket. $720, you read it right here. That's the average amount customers save each year. Want something bigger? How about 500 million? That's the total they've saved in cancel subscriptions. Rocket Money is the app that all of us need to save more money and be financially freed. Get started for free and see the joy it brings. Just visit rocketmoney.com/wait in the wings.
I would rather either stop the work's creation at the workshop stage than putting ourselves through financial and emotional agony.
Livent was on top of the world. Forbes revealed that the production company generated 25% of all North American theater revenue and raked in over 60 Tony Award nominations throughout the 1990s. But Livent's founder, Garth Drabinsky, wanted more. A theater mogul, film producer, and the co-founder of the Cineplex Odeon theater chain, Drabinsky believed that one had to spend money in order to make money. And if there was one thing Drabinsky was really good at, it was spending money. In April of 1997, Livent reached a deal with Audrey Geisel to secure the rights to some of Dr. Seuss's most famous stories, all with one goal in mind: to create an entire Seussiverse in a new Broadway musical called Seussical. Around this time, Times Square was transforming from a rundown crime hub into a metropolitan Disneyland, attracting more families than ever before. Serving as further proof to this Disneyfication, Disney itself struck musical gold with The Lion King, a show that tapped into the changing tide and appealed to both kids and adults. Now, Drabinsky? He wanted in on that racket. With his newest musical, Ragtime, inching closer to opening night on Broadway, the mogul invited the show's composers, Stephen Flaherty and Lynn Ahrens, into his office. He wanted them to compose the score for Seussical. It was a big ask. In his lifetime, Dr. Seuss created over 91 unique characters, a fact that left Ahrens and Flaherty equal parts excited and intimidated by the challenge of figuring out how to wrestle all of them into one show. The two spent many ragtime rehearsals trying to figure out what the hell a Dr. Seuss musical would even look like. Sensing their hesitations, Drabinsky sweetened the deal. In pure Livent style, he offered the two in advance of an unheard of $493,000. Ahrens and Flaherty were in. When it came to the script, Drabinsky knew he needed to find someone who could seamlessly mix deep themes with zany nonsense. Luckily, he knew just the man for the job: Eric Idle. As one of the founding members of the surrealist comedy group Monty Python, Idle made a career out of creating brilliant nonsense. Idle met with the Seussical creative team, and instead of talking about the actual story, discussed the overall vibe Ahrens, Flaherty, and director Frank Galati wanted the show to have. It was clear early on that Ahrens and Flaherty envisioned a very different Seussical compared to Idle's idea. Ahrens and Flaherty wanted simplicity. Idle wanted chaos. He wanted arms reaching out of the wall, people getting dragged off the stage, steam and debris spewing out of the orchestra pit, all coming together to create a sense of anarchy never before seen on Broadway. Ahrens and Flaherty, on the other hand, wanted to honor Dr. Seuss's economy of line. No matter how outlandish the concepts, Seuss showed great discipline in his craft, never drawing or writing anything unless it was absolutely necessary. In many ways, Seuss provided the outline. It was up to the reader to fill in the blanks. The team worked on the script through the majority of 1998, nearly completing the first draft of the show that November. And then, just as Seussical started to pick up steam, it all came crashing down.
And the best new musical of 1998 is The Lion King.
In 1998, Ragtime lost the Best Musical Tony Award to The Lion King. The Ragtime loss was sure to be a huge blow to the $12 million Livent investment, especially considering that reviews for the show were lukewarm, and it was already struggling to sell tickets. However, Livent curiously kept declaring that the show was making money hand over fist. To New York journalists who saw how empty the theater was most nights, something wasn't adding up. Adding fuel to the fire, many close associates of Garth Drabinsky started to notice that he wasn't paying them. In a shock move, Garth Drabinsky stepped down as Livent's CEO in April 1998, to instead become the vice chairman and chief creative director. 7 months later, Livent filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company, once said to be making hundreds of millions of dollars in profits, was actually in debt, more than $334 million. That's when it came to light that Drabinsky himself was keeping 2 sets of accounting books. One to show to investors and the Securities and Exchange Commission, and a second book, known only to Drabinsky and his accountants, showing the damning truth. Drabinsky and his business partner, Myron Gottlieb, spent 8 years defrauding their investors to the tune of nearly $500 million. What's worse, an investigation from the Office of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York discovered that Livent itself purchased $380,000 worth of ragtime tickets in an attempt to cover their tracks and make the show look more profitable than it actually was. That December, police stormed the Livent headquarters and Drabinsky fled to Canada. The first draft of Seussical was nearly finished, and so was Garth Drabinsky. Seven months later, with their production company bankrupt and their lead producer fleeing for exile in Canada, nobody knew what to do about Seussical. When Livent declared bankruptcy in April of 1998, Ahrens and Flaherty used it as a time to tell Eric Idle they wanted to write the script themselves. Even though he didn't think it was a good idea, Idle reluctantly agreed to step down. In May of 1999, with nothing left to lose, the interim management at Livent decided to move forward on a 2-week Seussical workshop in New York City. Nothing too fancy, just a couple of people reading the script to get the material up on its feet. Surprisingly, Eric Idle, now detached from the project, agreed to read for The Cat in the Hat. A gaggle of potential investors and industry insiders crammed inside a New York City rehearsal room to sneak a peek at Seussical. Using only the bare essentials and the power of the music, the cast spent the next 2 weeks using their imagination to turn chairs and music stands into boats and truffula trees. Everyone who saw it left the rehearsal room completely enamored and excited about the promise Seussical held. Many sensed this show was going to be big, even going so far as calling it the next Lion King. Also in the crowd during that reading, Audrey Geisel. She was blown away by the production, later telling the LA Times how amazed she was to see all of her husband's works interwoven in such a manner. 1 month later, a global events production company called SFX Entertainment announced a deal to purchase Livent, declaring to the LA Times that they planned to move away from the financially ailing role of producing original Broadway musicals. Once again, Seussical's fate looked sealed. And yet, SFX loved the idea of the musical, and to everyone's surprise, decided to move forward with it. That summer, investors and potential producers flocked to Seussical's first workshop performance at the University of Toronto. Unlike the casual New York reading in a tiny rehearsal room, the Toronto workshop found the cast up on their feet, performing the whole show in a much more formal setting. A majority of the New York reading cast, with the exception of Eric Idle, reprised their roles. Ahrens and Flaherty cast actress Andrea Martin to take over as the Cat in the Hat. The Toronto performance was extremely low budget. The costumes made up of t-shirts and sweatpants, the set nothing more than a scaffolding and a battered ladder. Keeping the economy of line in mind, the team leaned into their limited resources, turning the simple household objects into a playground of imagination. Eddie Korbich, the actor playing the Onceler, described the experience as magical, with everyone knowing they had something special. The showing inspired the audience to suspend their disbelief and use their mind's eye to transport themselves to the whimsical land of Whoville. They didn't need all the bells and whistles. All they needed was a simple show with beautiful music. As the final curtain fell on the Toronto workshop, a swarm of top Broadway producers went to battle over the show like the Zooks fighting over butter side down toast. Everyone wanted a sweet taste of Seussical. In the end, SFX chose two lucky individuals, Barry and Fran Weisler. Not only did the two receive mountains of critical and commercial acclaim with their revivals of Fiddler on the Roof, Bye Bye Birdie, and Grease, all of those shows were conveniently co-produced with SFX. With the estimated cost of Seussical sitting at around $8 million, SFX and the Weislers needed another partner with serious money. While Livent won the stage rights to a majority of the Dr. Seuss estate, they didn't get the rights to all of the stories. In September of 1998, Universal Studios paid $5 million for all rights to The Grinch, and got to work on a live-action film version starring Jim Carrey. Miraculously, the Weislers and SFX convinced Universal to partner up with them as a co-producer for the show. For the most part, the Weislers stuck to the business side of things, allowing Ahrens and Flaherty the space they needed to make the lovable and magnetizing workshop production ready for Broadway. Seussical chugged into Boston's Colonial Theater in the summer of 2000 for their first full-scale production. For decades, the theater was a popular spot for Broadway-bound musicals to iron out their kinks before making the jump to New York City. The 200 miles between the two cities provided a safety cushion in a way, away from the judgy critics. Halfway through the process, Ahrens and Flaherty stood in the ladies' restroom of the theater, asking one question. Why, God, why? Seussical went into Boston with sky-high expectations. Their prior readings and workshops generated a huge buzz around just how incredible this show could be. But after their first few performances in Boston, that buzz turned into scuzz. For the most part, audiences left the show confused and underwhelmed. When going into Boston, designer Eugene Lee gave 3 options for what the set could look like. There was a crazy version, going all in on Seuss, a bare-bones version staying true to the innovative past readings, and a best of both worlds version. Wanting to recapture the feeling of the past readings, the team went all in with the bare-bones version, leading to a dark, industrial set that looked closer to an alleyway from Rent than the jungle of Newell. The reception towards the show turned negative, not only amongst audiences, but amongst the cast. Ayers and Flaherty invited Andrea Martin to reprise her role as the Cat in the Hat, an offer she turned down to be with her family in Los Angeles. To fill her spot, the team cast David Shiner. Prior to Seussical, Shiner made a name for himself and gained countless accolades for his work as a mime. Shiner hadn't spoken on stage since his college days, but was ready to challenge himself. As time went on, the original members, preaching of the magic they'd felt in Toronto and the early New York readings, clashed with the new actors who saw a disaster crashing down around them. Each new review proved more biting than the last, and after a string of lackluster performances, the Boston production was on track to lose close to $1 million. The producers went on red alert. When they signed on, the Weislers opted to focus on the business side of the show and let the artists focus on the creative. That abruptly changed in late August, partway through the Boston run, when they started calling the creative shots. SFX was concerned as well. Practically overnight, a power struggle brewed to the surface among the co-producers, each one stepping over the other in an attempt to save the show. And pretty soon, Redfish Bluefish turned into the Red Wedding. When approaching Seussical, the Weislers made it no secret that they wanted the show to appeal to adults, even going so far as hiring experimental photographer David LaChapelle to capture the characters popping out of sewer holes in New York City. As Barry Weisler put it in an interview with the New York Post, David's photography is dangerous, erotic, and edgy. And that is what the Seussical is. Catherine Zuber's costumes were anything but. Zuber went all in, creating over 200 over-the-top cartoonish designs that directly clashed with the edgy set and marketing images. When she put ears and a tail on Horton, she made clear that it wasn't set in stone, and she was open to making changes. Upon seeing it for the first time, Lynn Ahrens cried in the back of the theater, saying, "Oh no, it's a children's musical." Instead of the characters looking like cartoons, Ahrens and Flaherty wanted them to look like human beings, with regular clothing that conveyed each character's different quirks. Just as Zuber prepared to make the adjustments, the Weislers fired her 2 days into tech rehearsals. Zuber crying in an alleyway didn't exactly boost the morale. Literally the next day, costume designer William Ivy Long was brought in to replace her. Unlike the Weislers, who dove in headfirst to save the sinking ship, the show's director, Frank Galati, detached himself. According to New York Post critic Michael Riedel, producers Barry and Fran Weisler were ready to extend Boston previews of Seussical for an extra week if the show got good enough reviews. Instead, they cut it short, closing 1 week early. Boston might have provided privacy for Richard Rodgers and George Gershwin to perfect their shows in the 30s and 40s, but they didn't have to deal with the internet. In an industry first, the backstage happenings of Seussical beamed directly into the homes of anyone with dial-up and a computer. Leading the charge was a site called All That Chat, a message board of theater enthusiasts who cut into Seussical harder than a Who carving a roast beast. Every damning behind-the-scenes story appeared online instantly. The frequency of updates moved so fast that sometimes All That Chat learned about things before the cast did. For example, producers planned on replacing 15-year-old Andrew Keenan Bolger, who played Jojo the mayor's son before Broadway, due to his voice changing. Bolger only found out by reading it online. Someone in the cast was leaking updates. No one behind the scenes knew how to stop this digital distressor. At one point, the Weislers gathered the entire cast and crew together, saying, "If anyone is unhappy here, there's no hard feelings, just tell us and you can go." They never discovered who the mole was. With the negative internet speculation growing every day, a director no longer in the fight, and only a month until Broadway previews started, the Weislers made a tough decision. They needed a show doctor, someone with fresh eyes to come in and completely rework the show. And they needed one fast. The producers approached choreographer Kathleen Marshall and asked if her brother, Rob, a well-known choreographer turned director, would be willing to take a look at the show. Rob Marshall agreed to come on board, and the Weislers told current director Frank Galati they didn't want him around anymore. After 2 years of work on Seussical, Galati hopped on a plane, flew home to his family in Chicago, and never came back. Understandably frustrated over the firing of Galati, and realizing that his set design was a scapegoat for the show's failure in Boston, Eugene Lee finally reached his breaking point and walked off the production soon after. A lot happened when Seussical rolled into the Richard Rodgers Theater in New York. They lost their original director, costume designer, and set designer. It was $2 million over budget, public opinion was in the trash, and advanced ticket sales were less than $1 million. Producer Barry Weisler tried everything he could to reduce the show's budget, but kept running into one huge problem: the payment agreement with Ahrens and Flaherty. According to the Post, in addition to the $493,000 advance the two received in 1998, Drabinsky also agreed to pay Ahrens and Flaherty $95,000 in Boston, and another $95,000 when the show opened in New York. They were also to receive weekly royalty payments. The cost was simply too high for the Weislers, who proposed a deferment in the composer's weekly payments to at least give the show a shot at recouping. Ahrens and Flaherty refused. With how fast the Seussical ship was sinking, the Weislers made their stance clear. Either they'd take the deal or the Weislers walk. Sensing the producers were serious and not wanting to lose the production, Ahrens and Flaherty conceded. Since its inception, Seussical carried the heavy weight of expectation. Expectation that it could dethrone the Lion King. Expectation that it could run for years. Expectation that it could prove the internet naysayers wrong. Seussical on Broadway needed to deliver. The show in New York was miles away from what Ahrens and Flaherty envisioned at the start. In the blink of an eye, the show grew 3 sizes as show doctor Rob Marshall administered a lethal dose of razzle-dazzle. Beautiful slow ballads turned into fast poppy duets. The dark sets became a wash of big-budget theatricality. A 15-minute sequence telling the entire story of the Lorax got the axe. The way Marshall saw it, the show needed to start with a bang and end with a bang. When Seussical finally opened on November 30th, 2000, its overall cost had ballooned to over $10 million. The team worked tirelessly to streamline the story, opting to use Horton Hears a Who, Horton Hatches the Egg, and Gertrude McFuzz as the narrative framework to interweave the different stories and characters. After the cast took their opening night bows, everyone sat on edge waiting to see what people would say. Had all the sacrifices, the firings, the power struggles, and the over-the-top changes been enough to save the show? Well, judging by the first reviews, no. In an ironic twist, many reviewers felt the show tried too hard to be the Lion King, and that it used excessive spectacle in an attempt to distract. As for the audiences, everyone was still confused about what the show was going for. Was it a show for kids? For adults? Why was its marketing so sexy? By the time the new year rolled around, ticket sales plummeted. averaging roughly $400,000 a week. Not good news, considering the show cost $500,000 a week just to run. After the Weislers changed the set, the costumes, even the director, they were left with only one more major change to make in hopes of saving the show. The star. David Shiner wasn't a musical theater actor. A fact made pretty obvious in Boston when he tried improvising with a little girl in the audience and ended up making her cry. A few weeks after opening, the Weislers suggested that Shiner take a 4-week vacation. With how kindly the couple treated him, he agreed, figuring his standby would go on for him. With Shiner temporarily out of the picture, the Weislers got to work bringing in someone who was sure to put butts in the seats. Rosie ODonnell. A strong supporter of Seussical on her TV show, O'Donnell took over as the Cat in the Hat for a limited 4-week engagement, in a move that many in the industry criticized as stunt casting at its finest. The announcement alone caused ticket sales to jump to $551,000. When David Shiner returned, he could tell that he wasn't going to be playing the cat for much longer, as the Weislers were making offers to celebrities like Whoopi Goldberg, Tommy Tune, and Chevy Chase. The Rosie O'Donnell era proved a new precedent. The only way to keep Seussical alive was through celebrity stunt casting. Eventually, Shiner decided enough was enough, and he left the production. What followed was a conveyor belt of different celebrities. Olympic gymnast Cathy Rigby stepped in as the cat, and teen pop sensation Aaron Carter took over as JoJo. Every actor was on guard, knowing that at any moment, their role could be taken away by someone with a bigger name. The stunt casting proved successful at first, but a new larger-than-life musical based on the Mel Brooks comedy The Producers opened. And within no time, Seussical was lost in its shadow. Any chance of a Tony Award looked slim, and the show was hemorrhaging money. There wasn't anything more to be done. The Weislers accepted defeat and closed Seussical on May 20th, 2001. The show lost a total of $11 million. One of the most iconic moments in Horton Hears a Who is when Horton loses the dust speck, holding Whoville in a field full of clovers. Though the odds are overwhelmingly against him, he does something remarkable and picks through each individual clover, finally finding it on the 3 millionth try. In many ways, Ahrens and Flaherty lost their own little dust speck in Boston, and especially on Broadway, buried under tons of glitz and glamour. Much like Horton, Ahrens and Flaherty weren't going to stop looking until they found it again. 1 year after the show failed on Broadway, Ahrens and Flaherty enlisted a new team of producers and a new director to bring Seussical back to its rootsicle. The story shifted from being told through the eyes of Horton to the eyes of JoJo, a character who changed from being the son of the mayor of Whoville into just an anonymous child. Abandoning Rob Marshall's start with a bang, end with a bang approach, the team cut the huge opening number, opting instead to open with JoJo getting pulled into the world of Dr. Seuss by the Cat in the Hat. This inevitably led to the main conflict of the show, with the cat leading JoJo through a multitude of different Dr. Seuss stories and sabotaging him anytime he tried to solve a problem. The story then culminated in pure Seussian style as JoJo came to recognize that chaos in the world was inevitable, but that there was a certain beauty in that. The tour version of Seussical took to the road in 2002. Cathy Rigby experienced a gratifying moment during a stop in San Diego. As she recalled in an interview with the Baltimore Sun, Audrey Geisel, the widow of Dr. Seuss, came on stage for the curtain call. She said, "Whatever was missing in New York, you found it." The dark, edgy, and erotic Seussical was no more, leading schools, stock, and amateur theater companies to embrace the new version. A version that now embraced a bright, lighthearted nature and gave the audience just enough to let them fill in the blanks. Remarkably, in 2007, Seussical returned to the same city that chewed it up and spit it back out again when it re-premiered off-Broadway. This time around, however, the critics were much more forgiving, praising the new one-act 90-minute production for its ability to cut down on the spectacle, but still retain the sweet songs from Broadway. It is currently one of the most staged shows in America. So why did Seussical fail on Broadway but succeed everywhere else? You can blame it on the behind-the-scenes politics, muddling the creative vision, or the internet robbing the production of its privacy, or even the lofty expectations that crushed the show. But the answer, really, is collaboration. Musicals by nature are massive machines, gluppity-glupping along with the hopes of creating something wonderful. That being said, all the moving parts need to work in unison, a goal that becomes harder to achieve when there are 10,000 parts moving in 10,000 different directions. When Seussical started to fall apart, everybody had a different vision for what they thought they needed to do to save the show. And even worse, they all thought they were right. SFX figured it would be best to turn it into a mega musical. Rob Marshall figured it would be best to drench it in glitz and glamour. And the Weislers figured it would be best to fire everyone and bring in a bunch of celebrities. But through it all, everybody lost sight of what made the musical work at the start. Less was more. All it took to be transported was teamwork and not being afraid to let the audience have a good think. And one composer that definitely wasn't afraid to do that, Stephen Sondheim. But is it possible that he actually made his audience think a little too much? Click on this video to learn more about Sondheim's career and why so many of his classics seemed to flop.